My name is Eleanor Vance. I am 42 years old. And on a Tuesday morning in October, my own sister called me a beggar in front of 27 people. The woman who did it was Victoria, my older sister. She was the branch manager of Summit Bank, and she stood behind a polished mahogany desk with a nameplate that read Victoria Vance. Manager. She looked important. She always had. Before we dive in, if this story touches you, please consider subscribing to the channel and sharing this video to help me grow and tell more stories like this. The air inside the bank was warm and smelled of clean money and faint perfume. It was a world of hushed confidence, of quiet transactions that changed lives. The floors were marble, and they clicked under the heels of people who had places to be. I was not one of them. My shoes were soft-soled and silent. I had learned long ago to move through the world without making a sound. All I needed was $150. It wasn't for me. It was for Mrs. Higgins, my neighbor. She was 86 years old and lived on a pension that barely covered her groceries. Her heater had died in the night, and the repairman she'd called needed cash up front. The cold was setting, in the kind that gets into old bones and stays there. I had promised her I would help. I had the money in my checking account, but not in my wallet. I stood in line like everyone else, waiting my turn. I didn't want to see Victoria. I never wanted to see Victoria if I could help it. But her bank was the closest, and Mrs. Higgins was cold. So, I stood there clutching my purse, feeling small and out of place in my simple coat. The other customers wore tailored suits and expensive jackets. I wore my thrift store wool, practical and plain, just like me. When I reached the teller, I smiled politely. She was a young woman with kind eyes. "I just need to withdraw $150, please," I said quietly. Before the teller could even ask for my card, another voice cut through the air. A voice I knew better than my own. Well, look what the cat dragged in." It was Victoria. She had emerged from her glass-walled office, a shark gliding into open water. She leaned against the counter, crossing her arms. Her suit was sharp. Her lipstick was perfect, and her smile was a weapon. "Eleanor?" she said, drawing my name out as if it tasted bad. "What are you doing here? I thought you people used check cashing places." The lobby went quiet. The gentle hum of the computers seemed to fade. The only sound was the clicking of the teller's keyboard, which suddenly faltered. Every head turned towards us. I felt their eyes on me, on my worn coat, on my nervous hands. My cheeks began to burn. It was a familiar heat, the one that had followed me through every family dinner, every holiday, every moment I dared to take up space. "I just need some cash. Victoria," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of seeing me crumble. She laughed. It wasn't a small chuckle. It was a loud, cruel, theatrical laugh that echoed off the high ceilings. She wanted everyone to hear. She wanted everyone to see. Alone. She sneered. Don't tell me you need a loan. Ellie. She used the childhood nickname that always felt like a pinch. You know, we have minimum income requirements here. We don't really serve charity cases. Eleanor. The word hung in the air. Charity case. A man in a pinstriped suit chuckled. A woman behind me shifted her weight. A sigh of impatience. The young teller stared at her screen, pretending not to hear. Her own face flushed with embarrassment for me. They were all witnesses to my humiliation. And Victoria was the star of the show. I looked at my sister. I saw the triumphant gleam in her eyes. She loved this. She loved having an audience. She loved making me feel like nothing. It was the role she had perfected over a lifetime. She was the star, the success, the one who mattered. I was the afterthought, the shadow, the quiet disappointment. I could have fought back. I could have told her the money was for an elderly woman who was freezing in her own home. I could have screamed at her, asked her what I had ever done to deserve this bottomless well of her contempt. But I didn't. Arguing with Victoria was like throwing stones at a fortress. It only hurt your own hands. Instead, I held her gaze for a long moment. I let her see the hurt in my eyes. I wanted her to register it, to file it away with all the other hurts she had inflicted over the years. Then I let it go. A strange calm washed over me, cold and clear. It was the calm of a final decision. The calm of a door clicking shut for the last time. I said nothing. I simply pulled my hand back from the counter, turned around, and walked away. I could feel every eye in the bank on my back. I did not hurry. My steps were measured and even. I pushed open the heavy glass door and stepped out into the cold October air. The wind hit my face, and it felt like a slap. But the burning in my cheeks was already starting to fade, replaced by something else. Something hard and solid. As the door swung shut behind me, sealing me off from the whispers and the pitying looks, I had one clear thought. Victoria had no idea what she had just done. She had no idea she'd just humiliated a woman who could buy her bank, her building, and the entire city block it stood on, and still have enough left over to forget she'd spent the money. She thought I was a beggar. She was about to learn just how wrong she was. Walking home, the cold didn't just feel like weather. It felt like my childhood. It was the same invisible chill that had settled over me at the family dinner table. The one that came from being looked through, not looked at. I grew up in a quiet suburb in Ohio in a nice house with a green lawn and a 2-car garage. On the surface, it was perfect. Inside, it was a place where I learned to be invisible. I was the middle daughter, sandwiched between 2 stars. Victoria was the oldest, the achiever. Dad Robert adored her. His voice would boom with pride whenever he talked about her. Victoria just made partner. Victoria just closed the biggest deal of her career. That's my Victoria. He had a scrapbook filled with her awards, her newspaper clippings, her certificates of achievement. There was no scrapbook for me. Then there was Isabella, the youngest. She was the charming one. The beautiful one. Mom Susan doted on her. Isabella had a smile that could light up a room and a laugh that made people want to give her the world. She was the artist. The free spirit. Mom would spend hours helping Isabella with her school projects, her social life, her dreams. Our family photo albums were filled with Isabella at the prom. Isabella on stage. Isabella, surrounded by friends. And then there was me. I was steady, Eleanor. The one who got good grades but wasn't a genius. The one who was pretty enough but not a beauty. The one who stayed out of trouble and as a result stayed out of the spotlight. I was the quiet one. The reliable one. The one everyone forgot. My achievements were met with a distracted nod. Oh, that's nice, dear. My problems were dismissed. You're so sensible. Eleanor, you'll figure it out. My presence was just part of the background, like the wallpaper or the hum of the refrigerator. I learned not to speak too loudly, not to ask for too much, not to have needs that might inconvenience anyone. My role in the family was to be no trouble at all, and I played it perfectly. Only one person ever really saw me. That was Grandpa Arthur. Grandpa Arthur was my mother's father. He didn't live in a big, perfect house. He lived in a small cottage cluttered with books and old maps and tools for fixing clocks. It smelled of pipe tobacco and wood polish. While my parents saw a report card, Grandpa Arthur saw me. He would sit in his big, worn-out armchair and listen. Really listen. He'd ask me about the books I was reading, about the birds I watched in the backyard, about the thoughts I was too shy to say out loud to anyone else. You have a quiet strength, Ellie, he told me once, his voice a low rumble. Don't ever let them mistake your silence for weakness. Still, water runs deep. He was the only one who didn't try to compare me to Victoria or Isabella. He saw me for what I was, not for what I wasn't. He was my refuge. When I was 21, just before he passed away, he called me to his bedside. The air in the room was heavy with the scent of medicine and old age. My parents and sisters were in the hallway talking in hushed, important tones about funeral arrangements and the will. They had already moved on. Grandpa Arthur's hand felt like dry paper in mine. His eyes, though faded, were still sharp and clear. He motioned toward a small wooden box on his nightstand. It was a simple dark wood box, but it had an intricate lock made of brass. He pressed a small, old-fashioned key into my palm. This is for you, he whispered, his breath catching. For the youngest heart dot. He must have been confused. Isabella was the youngest. Grandpa, Isabella is the youngest. I corrected him gently. He shook his head. A small, firm gesture. No. The youngest heart. The one that hasn't grown hard yet. That's you. Eleanor. He gave my hand a weak squeeze. There's a note inside. Don't open it until you need to. Use it when they forget who you are. He died that night. At the funeral, My family grieved loudly. Victoria gave a polished eulogy about his business sense. Isabella cried beautifully. My parents accepted condolences with practiced sadness. I stood in the background holding the memory of his words, the weight of the key heavy in my pocket. In his will, he left Victoria his vintage watch and Isabella his collection of art books. To my parents, he left his house. To me, besides the box, he left a small inheritance. It was a modest sum, just enough to be noticed, but not enough for my family to be jealous. To Eleanor, for her quiet endeavors, the will read. My father had clapped me on the shoulder. Good for you, Eleanor. Be sensible with it. I was. I put the wooden box away in my closet and treasured it as the last gift from the only person who had ever truly seen me. I thought the key and the note were symbolic. Use it when they forget who you are. I assumed he meant I should find my courage, my inner strength. For years, I believed that was all it was. A beautiful, sentimental metaphor. I didn't realize he'd left me something else entirely. He hadn't just left me a box with a key. He had left me control of the original family trust. A vast and complex portfolio my great-grandfather had started generations ago. The inheritance was just a decoy. The real power was locked away, waiting for me to find it. Waiting for the day I finally understood that his final gift wasn't just courage. It was leverage. That frigid Tuesday started with a knock on my door. It was Mrs. Higgins' home care aide, a young woman named Elena. Her face was etched with worry. It's Mrs. Higgins, she said, her voice trembling slightly. Her furnace went out last night. It's like an icebox in there. I'm afraid for her. I threw on my coat and went next door immediately. Elena was right. The air in Mrs. Higgins's small, neat apartment was painfully cold. She was sitting in her armchair wrapped in 3 blankets, a thin, papery shawl over her shoulders. Her teacup rattled in her hands as she tried to drink. She looked small and fragile, like a little bird caught in a winter storm. Oh, Eleanor, dear, she said, her voice a weak whisper. It's just a bit of a chill. She was trying to be brave, but I could see the fear in her eyes. An elderly person in a freezing apartment isn't a minor inconvenience. It's a life-threatening emergency. I had already called a 24-hour repair service. A man named Joe was on his way, but he'd been clear on the phone. It's an emergency call-out fee. Ma'am, $150, cash only. Upfront, before I even look at it. I understood. He was a small business owner, not a charity. But Mrs. Higgins lived on a fixed income. Her pension check wasn't due for another week. She didn't have $150 in cash lying around. She barely had $15. Don't you worry about a thing, Mrs. Higgins, I told her, my voice full of a confidence I didn't entirely feel. I'll take care of it. Joe will be here soon and will have you warm in no time. Her relief was heartbreaking. Oh, Thank you, Eleanor. You're such a good girl. I was just the person next door. But in her world, I was someone who helped. I was seen. My own bank was across town. The closest one, just 3 blocks away, was Summit Bank, Victoria's bank. I hesitated for a moment. The thought of facing her, of asking for anything, made my stomach clench. It was always easier to just avoid her, to keep my small, quiet life separate from her big, shiny one. I could walk the extra mile, go to my own bank, and avoid the whole thing. But then I looked at Mrs. Higgins shivering under her blankets, and I felt a surge of resolve. This wasn't about me. This was about a vulnerable person who needed help right now. My pride didn't matter. My history with Victoria didn't matter. All that mattered was getting that cash. So, I walked the 3 blocks. I walked into the warm, polished lobby of Summit Bank, a place where I didn't belong. To ask for my own money? I stood in line, and when I got to the front, Victoria appeared as if summoned by my discomfort. She stood there, radiating success, and looked down at me. That was how she always looked at me, like she was on a mountaintop and I was in the valley below. Need a loan, she sneered, her voice carrying across the silent lobby. Her words hit me, but this time, they felt different. Behind the sting of her public scorn, I wasn't just thinking about myself. I was thinking about Mrs. Higgins. I was thinking about how simple it was for Victoria, with her big salary and her important job, to dismiss a need so urgent. To her, $150 was probably a rounding error, the cost of a business lunch. To Mrs. Higgins, it was the difference between warmth and sickness, between safety and danger. Victoria saw me standing there, and she assumed I was pathetic. She saw weakness. She saw a charity case. I stared at her. And for the first time, I didn't just see my successful older sister. I saw a bully. A woman so insecure in her own life that she had to build herself up by tearing me down. I remembered every single time she had done it. Every family dinner where she'd interrupted my stories to tell one of her own, louder and funnier. Every holiday where she'd mocked my clothes or my job or my quiet life. Every time my parents had laughed along with her, leaving me to swallow my words and shrink a little more. A lifetime of it. A lifetime of being the butt of the joke. A lifetime of being treated like I was less than. And for what? Because I was quiet. Because I didn't need the spotlight. Because I found happiness in small, simple things that she couldn't understand. Her sneer, the chuckles from the crowd, the teller's averted eyes, it all blended into a single, deafening roar of disrespect. The final straw wasn't just a straw. It was an anvil. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I didn't say a word about Mrs. Higgins because I knew in that moment that it wouldn't matter. Explaining my reasons to Victoria would be like describing color to a person born blind. She lacked the capacity to understand empathy. So, I let the silence be my answer. I turned my back on her and on the audience she had so carefully cultivated. I walked out of that bank and the heavy door closed behind me with a soft, final thud. It wasn't a retreat. It was an advance in a new direction. The humiliation didn't follow me out the door. It stayed in there with her. What I carried with me was a cold, hard certainty. I had spent 42 years accepting the role my family had given me. The invisible daughter, the charity case, the one who didn't matter. That role was now officially retired. The door hadn't just closed on the bank. It had closed on the person I used to be. The one who would have gone home and cried. The one who would have absorbed the shame and blamed herself that Eleanor was gone. A new one was standing on the sidewalk, the frigid wind on her face, finally ready to pick up the key Grandpa Arthur had left her. I didn't go back to Mrs. Higgins right away. First, I went to an ATM at a different bank and withdrew the $150. I gave it to Elena, told her to pay Joe, and promised I'd check in later. Then, I went home to my small, quiet apartment. To my family, this was my entire world. A one-bedroom apartment in a modest building. The furniture was comfortable but old. The art on the walls was from local craft fairs. My car was a 10-year-old sedan that I paid for in cash. They saw my life as a reflection of me, small, frugal, and utterly unremarkable. They pitied me for it. At Christmas, they would give me gift cards for groceries, their faces a mixture of charity and condescension. They had no idea that this apartment was a stage. It was a costume I wore to keep my real life safe. That night, I didn't turn on the television or read a book. I sat at my simple kitchen table, opened my laptop, and logged into my real life. My normal banking app showed a balance of a few thousand, a sensible cushion. But that wasn't the account I opened. I navigated through 3 layers of security, typed in a 32-character password, and pressed enter. The screen went black for a second. Then a new interface loaded. It was clean, minimalist, and decorated with a single simple logo, a stylized constellation of Orion. At the top of the screen were 2 words, Orion Fund. Beneath them, a number, account value, $4,210,350,000. $4.2 billion. This was my world. This was my work. This was the secret I had kept for 15 years. It had started with Grandpa Arthur's inheritance. That sensible amount of money my father had advised me to be careful with. I didn't put it in a savings account. I used it as seed money. My family thought my quietness was a lack of ambition. It wasn't. It was focus. When no one is talking to you at the dinner table, you learn to listen to everything else. When no one is watching you, you learn to observe the world in minute detail. My mind didn't work like Victoria's or Isabella's. I didn't see people or deals. I saw patterns. I saw systems. In college, I'd majored in mathematics and computer science. Not because I wanted a flashy career in tech, but because numbers felt like the most honest language in the world. They didn't lie. They didn't have hidden agendas. After one particularly brutal family holiday where Victoria had called my data entry job a waste of a brain, I decided I was done playing their game. I took Grandpa Arthur's money and my knowledge and I started to build something of my own. I built an algorithm, a piece of software designed to predict global market shifts based on thousands of seemingly unrelated data points. Weather patterns, shipping movements, political speeches, social media sentiment. It was designed to see the invisible threads that connect the world. I called it Compass because it could see storms coming long before anyone else even saw clouds. I became a silent investor, a ghost in the machine. I created a persona, a legal fiction named E.V. Thorne, my initials, and my mother's maiden name, E.V. Thorne was nobody and everybody. Thorne made small strategic investments that Compass identified. Those small investments grew. Then they grew bigger. Within 5 years, I was managing millions. Within 10, it was billions. The Orion Fund was my private holding company. It owned everything. Tech startups in Silicon Valley, real estate in Tokyo, shipping lanes in the Atlantic. I lived on a tiny fraction of the interest, maintaining my cover as Steady Eleanor. While my family was mocking my thrift store clothes, I was quietly executing a corporate takeover of a German manufacturing firm. While Victoria was bragging about her promotion to branch manager, I was financing a medical research project that would save thousands of lives. I never touched the principal. I never flaunted it. The money was never the point. The point was the work. The point was building something that was mine, something they couldn't touch, couldn't criticize, couldn't even comprehend. It was my secret garden, a world where I wasn't invisible. I was the architect. And then, about 6 months ago, something interesting happened. During a routine review of my assets, I noticed a new name in a portfolio of regional banks that Orion had acquired through a larger merger, Summit Bank. I had clicked through the corporate ownership charts, tracing the lines of control from one holding company to the next until I landed on the final, undeniable truth. Through a series of mergers and acquisitions I had personally approved, my fund, the Orion Fund, was the primary owner of the parent corporation that owned Summit Bank. Victoria didn't just work at a bank. She worked in my bank. She was an employee in a building I owned, drawing a salary I indirectly paid, sitting at a desk that was, for all intents and purposes, my property. The irony was so staggering, so profound that I had actually laughed out loud in my quiet little apartment. Until today. It had just been a funny secret. A private joke that I told no one. But after she called me a charity case, after she humiliated me for needing to help a freezing old woman, it wasn't funny anymore. It was leverage. I sat in front of my laptop until late into the night. The glowing numbers of the Orion Fund seemed to pulse with a life of their own. For a long time, I just stared at the screen, letting the reality of the situation sink in. I could ruin her. With a few clicks, I could have Victoria fired, blacklisted from the entire financial industry. I could crush her career. The one thing that gave her identity, the one thing my father valued her for. The thought was tempting. It rose up in me, hot and bitter. The taste of payback after a lifetime of being pushed down. But then I thought of Grandpa Arthur. I thought of his kind eyes, his gentle wisdom. Still, water runs deep. Revenge wasn't deep. It was a shallow, murky pool that dirtied everyone who waded into it. I wasn't after revenge. I wasn't Victoria. I was after something far more valuable. Recognition. I didn't want to destroy her. I just wanted her and all of them to finally see me. At 3 a.m., when the world was dark and quiet, I picked up my phone. I didn't call the bank. I called Sarah Jenkins, my personal attorney in New York. She was the only other person on earth who knew that Eleanor Vance and E.V. Thorne were the same person. She was sharp, discreet, and fiercely loyal. She answered on the second ring, her voice instantly alert. "Ms. Thorne, is everything all right?" "Everything is fine, Sarah," I said, my voice calm and even. I was no longer steady, Eleanor. I was E.V. Thorne, and my voice carried the quiet authority that came with managing billions of dollars. "I need you to arrange something for me first thing tomorrow morning." "Of course. What do you need?" "Schedule an emergency audit and portfolio review with the regional director of the Apex Financial Group. I believe his name is Michael Ross. The meeting needs to happen tomorrow at the main downtown branch. Tell him a primary stakeholder will be there in person. Representative E.V. Thorne." There was a brief pause on the line. Sarah knew I never made in-person appearances. My anonymity was my greatest asset. "Understood," she said, her voice betraying no surprise. "Is there a specific agenda?" "The agenda is a full-scale asset reallocation," I said. "He'll understand what that means." "Consider it done. The meeting will be set for 10 a.m. Thank you, Sarah." I hung up the phone. It was done. The first domino had been pushed. I walked over to my closet and retrieved the small wooden box Grandpa Arthur had given me. I hadn't opened it in years. My fingers traced the smooth, dark wood. Using the small brass key, I unlocked it. The lid opened with a soft click. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was a single folded piece of paper. It was his handwriting, thin and spidery with age, but perfectly clear. I unfolded it and read the words I had memorized long ago. "Use it when they forget who you are." For the first time, I understood the true meaning. He wasn't talking about courage. He was talking about power. He had left me the keys to a kingdom, knowing that one day, the people who were supposed to love me would push me so far that I would have no choice but to use it. He knew they would forget I was a daughter, a sister, a person with feelings and worth. They had forgotten. And now it was time to remind them. I closed the box and began to prepare. There was no rage in my movements. No trembling hands. There was only a profound sense of purpose. I went to my closet and pushed past the simple, frugal clothes my family saw. At the very back, in a garment bag, was a single, expensive, impeccably tailored navy blue dress. I had bought it for a corporate gala in Zurich. I decided to attend at the last minute and never wore again. It was a suit of armor. I laid it out on the bed. Then I found the simple, elegant leather briefcase I used on the rare occasions I traveled for business. I printed out a single-page summary of the Orion Fund's holdings in Summit Bank's parent company. Just one page. That was all I would need. I showered and washed my hair. I tied it back in a severe, professional bun. I looked at my face in the mirror. There were no tears. No anger. Just clear, determined eyes. The eyes of E. V. Thorne. I was not walking into that bank as Eleanor Vance, the invisible sister who needed $150. I was walking in as the owner. I was not a storm of anger. I was something quieter and far more powerful. I was a tectonic shift, a fundamental change in the landscape that no one sees coming until the ground beneath their feet begins to move. They had forgotten who I was. Tomorrow morning, I would reintroduce myself. The next morning, I did not drive my 10-year-old sedan. A black town car arranged by Sarah was waiting for me at the curb at precisely 9:45 a.m. The driver, a man in a crisp suit, held the door for me and addressed me as Ms. Thorne. He did not say it loudly, but the name carried its own weight. As we pulled up to the bank, I saw him before he saw me. Michael Ross, the regional director. He was standing on the steps, nervously adjusting his tie. He was younger than I expected, with a face that was trying to project calm authority but was failing. A sheen of nervous sweat glistened on his forehead. Yesterday, he wouldn't have given me a second glance. Today, he was waiting on the curb for me. The driver opened my door and I stepped out. I was wearing the navy dress, simple and severe. I carried only the thin leather briefcase. Michael Ross's eyes scanned the street, looking for a fleet of limousines. Perhaps. He almost missed me. When his gaze finally landed on me, a flicker of confusion crossed his face. He was expecting, I imagine, someone older, louder, more obviously powerful. He was expecting a man. Ms. Thorne, he asked, his voice uncertain. Mr. Ross, I replied, my tone level and cool. Thank you for meeting me on such short notice. His professional mask snapped into place. The confusion vanished, replaced by a wide, toothy smile that didn't touch his eyes. He rushed forward, his hand extended. Not at all, Ms. Thorne. It is an absolute honor to have you. A pleasure. Please. Come in. Come in. He practically tripped over himself. ushering me through the heavy glass doors. The lobby fell silent, just as it had yesterday. But this was a different kind of silence. Yesterday, it was the silence of a crowd witnessing a humiliation. Today, it was the silence of difference. The tellers froze, their hands hovering over their keyboards. The customers in line turned, their eyes wide with curiosity and awe. They didn't know who I was, but they knew I was important. Michael Ross's fawning behavior told them everything. From behind the glass wall of her office, Victoria watched. I saw her the moment I walked in. She was standing holding a coffee mug, a familiar look of managerial impatience on her face as she observed the commotion. She was probably annoyed that Mr. Ross was making such a scene. Her eyes met mine. For a fraction of a second, she registered me as Eleanor, and her expression tightened into its default sneer. Then she saw Michael Ross bowing and scraping at my side. She saw the way every employee in the bank was staring at me. Her sneer faltered, her brow furrowed in confusion. She could not compute what she was seeing. The two images, Eleanor, her pathetic sister, and this woman being treated like royalty, refused to merge in her mind. Right this way, Ms. Thorne, Michael said, leading me past the line of tellers, directly toward the manager's office, directly toward Victoria. As we approached, Victoria's face went pale. She stood frozen in the doorway of her own office, the coffee mug held stiffly in her hand. Her authority, which had always seemed so absolute within these walls, was evaporating before her eyes. "Victoria," Michael Ross said, his voice sharp and dismissive. "Get us some coffee and close the door on your way out." He didn't even look at her. His entire focus was on me. To him, she was just a piece of furniture in the room. I walked past her and into her office. I took in the details. The framed photo of her with our parents on the credenza, the collection of corporate awards on the shelf, the faint scent of her expensive perfume. This was her throne room. Without waiting for an invitation, I sat down in her chair, the large black leather chair behind her mahogany desk. I placed my briefcase on the polished wood. The chair sighed softly under my weight. It felt comfortable. It felt right. Victoria was still hovering in the doorway, her face a mask of disbelief. Michael Ross cleared his throat impatiently. "Victoria, the coffee." "What is this?" Victoria finally managed to say, her voice a strained whisper. Her eyes were locked on me. She was not looking at her boss. She was looking at her sister, sitting in her chair in her office, a place I had no right to be. Michael shot her a look of pure fury. "Do as I say," he hissed. I raised a hand. A small, simple gesture. "That won't be necessary. Mr. Ross, you can stay." "Victoria, this concerns you." Michael Ross looked surprised, but he nodded quickly. "Of course, Ms. Thorne." Whatever you wish. Victoria stumbled into the room, closing the door behind her. She didn't sit. There was only one other chair, a small one for customers, and she seemed to understand that it was no longer her place to be comfortable. She stood awkwardly by the wall, clutching her mug so tightly her knuckles were white. The mask of the confident bank manager was gone. All that was left was a confused, frightened woman. "What is this?" she asked again, her voice cracking. This time, the question was directed at me. I looked at her. I really looked at her. Perhaps for the first time in my adult life, without the filter of hurt or intimidation. I saw a woman who was terrified. A woman whose entire world was tilting on its axis. I gave her a small, sad smile. "Business," I said. "Real business?" The silence in Victoria's office was thick and heavy. It was broken only by the faint, frantic tapping of Michael Ross's pen against a notepad he held in a trembling hand. He was trying to look composed, but the panicked energy rolling off him was palpable. Victoria remained pressed against the wall, her face ashen, her eyes darting between me and her boss, trying to solve an impossible equation. I let the silence stretch, letting them both sit with their anxiety. Then I reached forward and opened my briefcase. The latches clicked open with two sharp, clean sounds that made both of them jump. Inside, there was only a single folder. I slid it out and placed it on the center of the desk. I didn't open it. The gesture was enough. "Mr. Ross," I began, my voice quiet, but carrying to every corner of the room. "The Orion Fund is one of the primary stakeholders in your parent company, Apex Financial Group. My understanding is that our holdings constitute a controlling interest." Michael Ross swallowed hard, nodding vigorously. "Yes, Ms. Thorne. Absolutely. We value your investment tremendously. Tremendously." He sounded like he was trying to sell me a car warranty. "Good," I said. "Then you understand that my visit today isn't a social call." I paused, letting my gaze drift from his terrified face to my sister's. Victoria looked like she was going to be sick. I folded my hands on the desk in front of me. "The Orion Fund is executing a complete withdrawal of all capital assets from Apex Financial Group. That includes all liquid cash, stocks, and convertible bonds. The total amount is $4.2 billion. The transfer is to be initiated effective immediately." The tapping of Michael Ross's pen stopped. His face, which had been pale, went completely white. He looked like he had seen a ghost. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The sheer scale of the number seemed to have short-circuited his brain. I don't understand," he finally stammered. "Ms. Thorne, a withdrawal of that magnitude. It's not possible to do it immediately. It would require board approvals, SEC filings, and the impact. A capital flight of that size would trigger every automated market alert. It would freeze every system. Not just in this bank, but in the entire regional financial network. His voice rose with each word, tipping into hysteria. It would be catastrophic. I am aware of the impact, I said evenly, my voice a stark contrast to his rising panic. My legal team at Jenkins Associates has already prepared the necessary filings. They will be executed the moment I give the order. The catastrophe, as you call it, is entirely within my legal rights as a majority shareholder. I let my eyes settle on him. Then perhaps, I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper, you should conduct a thorough review of your management culture, from the top down. My gaze shifted deliberately to Victoria. And in that moment, Michael Ross understood. The fog of financial panic cleared from his eyes, replaced by a dawning, horrified comprehension. He turned his head slowly to look at Victoria, who was now trembling visibly. He was finally connecting the dots. The stakeholders' unprecedented nuclear option of a withdrawal, the stakeholders' presence in this specific, unremarkable branch, the stakeholders' focus on this specific, unremarkable manager. Victoria's voice was a barely audible squeak. All the cruelty, all the confidence, all the arrogance had been stripped away. All that was left was raw, naked fear. You, she whispered, her eyes wide. You're E. V. Thorne. The name hung in the air between us. The mythical entity she had probably heard about in corporate memos. The faceless power behind the company she worked for. And it was me. Her sister. The one she had called a beggar just 24 hours ago. I gave her the same small, sad smile from before. I only wanted $150 yesterday. Victoria, I said softly. The words landed like a physical blow. The truth of it, the sheer cosmic irony of the situation, was too much for her to bear. Her face crumpled. Her knees gave out and she slid down the wall, collapsing into a heap on the floor. A choked, guttural sob escaped her lips. The coffee mug shattered on the polished floor, splashing brown liquid across her ruined suit. Tears streamed through her perfect makeup, carving pale tracks through her foundation. Michael Ross stared at the scene, his face a mask of cold fury. His career was flashing before his eyes. The catastrophic withdrawal, the market collapse, all of it because of a branch manager's petty cruelty. He turned to the sobbing mess on the floor. His voice was devoid of all sympathy. It was the voice of a man cutting his losses. You're fired. He didn't even look at her as he said it. He looked at me, his eyes pleading for mercy. But I wasn't looking at him. I was looking at my sister, crying on the floor of the office that was no longer hers. And I felt nothing. Not triumph. Not pity. Just a vast, empty quiet. The debt had been paid. The news spread faster than I could have imagined. It didn't just stay within the bank. By mid-afternoon, it was a headline on financial news websites. Mystery fund initiates shock withdrawal. regional banking giant teeters. The stories were filled with speculation about the identity of E.V. Thorne and the reasons for such a drastic, market-shaking move. They called it aggressive, unprecedented, hostile. They didn't know it was just personal. I didn't complete the withdrawal. Of course. That was never the plan. The plan was to make the threat to show them the power I held. After Victoria was escorted from the building and Michael Ross had promised a complete corporate culture overhaul and a formal written apology, I had Sarah Jenkins graciously agree to pause the transfer pending a review. The systems didn't freeze. The bank didn't collapse. But the message had been delivered. By nightfall, my personal phone, the one registered to Eleanor Vance, began to buzz. It was a number I knew by heart. My mother. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, a text appeared. Eleanor. Call me immediately. It's an emergency. I ignored it. Then a call from my father. I ignored that, too. Then my younger sister, Isabella. It became a relentless onslaught of buzzes and pings. A digital siege. They had clearly heard the news. Not the financial news, but the family news. Victoria must have called them. Sobbing and incoherent, telling them the impossible story of what had happened. Finally, I listened to my mother's voicemail. Her voice was frantic, laced with a familiar, cloying tone of parental disappointment. Eleanor, I just got off the phone with your sister. I don't understand any of this, but she is an absolute wreck. They fired her. How could you do this? You have to fix it. This is your family. Next, my father's. His voice was colder, angrier. Eleanor Vance. I don't know what kind of stunt you just pulled, but you have embarrassed this entire family. Victoria's career is in ruins because of you. We raised you to be better than this. Call me back now. Embarrassed us. That was always his primary concern. Not that Victoria was hurting, but that her failure reflected poorly on him. Then a string of texts from Isabella. Ellie. Victoria is falling apart. Mom and Dad are freaking out. What did you do? People are saying you have all this money. Is it true? Whatever is going on, you have to fix this. For Victoria, we're family. Family. The word echoed in my mind. It was a word they used like a weapon, a shield they hid behind whenever they wanted something from me. Where was family yesterday morning when Victoria was laughing at me in front of a lobby full of strangers? Where was family during all those years of quiet dinners and forgotten birthdays? Where was that word when I was begging not for money, but just to be seen? Their panic wasn't for me. It wasn't even really for Victoria. It was for themselves. Their perfect family narrative had been shattered. The hierarchy, Victoria the success, Isabella the darling, Eleanor the afterthought, had been blown to pieces. They didn't know how to function in this new reality where I was not at the bottom. I sat in my quiet apartment, the one they all pitied me for, and I felt a strange sense of detachment. Their frantic messages felt like they were coming from a great distance, from a world I no longer belonged to. They were panicking because they had lost control over me. They were discovering far too late that the person they thought was a pawn was actually the one controlling the entire board. After an hour of the relentless buzzing, I turned my phone to silent. But one last text from my mother came through before I did. "We are all coming over on Sunday. We need to talk about this as a family and settle things." The arrogance of it. They weren't asking to come. They were telling me. They were still trying to give me orders. I typed back a simple reply. It was the first time I had responded to any of them. "No, not your house. Sunday. 6. My place. We'll settle everything." I sent them the address. Not to my small apartment, of course, but to the house they never knew existed. I knew they would come. Their greed and their curiosity would be too strong to resist, and I would be ready for them. On Sunday evening, a few minutes before 6, their car pulled into my driveway. It was my father's oversized luxury sedan, a car that always seemed to announce his importance. I watched from the floor-to-ceiling windows of my living room as they got out. The house wasn't a mansion. It was a modern, minimalist structure of glass, stone, and dark wood built into a cliffside overlooking the vast gray expanse of Lake Erie. It was a house that whispered wealth, not shouted it. It was a house that valued privacy and strength over ornate decoration. It was my house. They stood in the driveway for a full minute, just staring. My father, my mother, and Isabella. They looked up at the clean lines of the building, their mouths slightly agape. They had expected my tiny, sensible apartment. They had come armed with lectures and accusations, ready to put me back in my place. But my place, it turned out, was not what they thought it was. I opened the front door before they had a chance to ring the bell. "Come in," I said. They walked inside, their steps hesitant on the polished concrete floors. Their eyes darted everywhere, taking in the open-plan living space, the huge fireplace, the original artwork on the walls, the vast lake visible through the wall of glass. Their awe was palpable, and underneath it, I could smell something else, the scent of greed. Their minds were already racing, calculating, reevaluating my worth to them. "Eleanor," my mother said, her voice breathy. "This house? Where did all this come from?" "I've been fortunate in my work," I said simply, leading them to the living room. I did not offer them a tour. I did not offer them drinks. This was not a social gathering. It was a final board meeting. They sat uncomfortably on the low, modern sofa. They looked small and out of place. For a few minutes, they tried to lecture me. My father took the lead, his voice attempting its usual booming authority, but it was hollow in the high-ceilinged room. "Eleanor, we are here because we are worried," he began. "What you did to Victoria was cruel and unnecessary. Families are supposed to support each other, to forgive each other. Money. He gestured vaguely at the house. My mother chimed in. Your sister made a mistake. She was under a lot of pressure at work. You have to find it in your heart to forgive her and to help her. She lost her job because of you. They spoke for 10 minutes. I let them. I listened quietly as they told me about forgiveness, loyalty, and the unbreakable bonds of family. I listened to all the beautiful words they had never once put into practice. When they were finished, a heavy silence fell. They looked at me expecting an apology, expecting me to break down, to promise to make everything right, to restore the comfortable order of their world. Instead, I reached for a thin folder I had placed on the coffee table. I opened it. I agree, I said, my voice calm and clear. We should settle things. I looked directly at my younger sister. Isabella. Let's start with the family trust. The one Grandpa Arthur set up for our education. Isabella shifted nervously. What about it? I did a full audit last week, I said. I found some interesting invoices. For example, several from a company called Art Supplies Unlimited over the past 2 years, totaling over $30,000. The strange thing is, according to state business records, Art Supplies Unlimited doesn't exist. I slid a piece of paper across the table. It was a copy of a forged invoice. You've been stealing from the family, Isabella, for 2 years. You've been siphoning money that was meant for all of us. Isabella's charming smile vanished. Her face went pale, then blotchy red. She looked at our parents for help, but they were staring at her in stunned, horrified silence. The darling of the family was a common thief. I then turned my gaze to my parents. You want to talk about family? About support? For 40 years. You have treated me like a piece of furniture. You celebrated Victoria's ambition and Isabella's charm. And you ignored me because I was quiet. You taught me that my worth in this family was based on how little space I took up. You didn't build a family. You built a hierarchy based on your own preferences. I looked at all 3 of them, their faces a mixture of shock, shame, and disbelief. This isn't a family, I said, my voice steady and final. It's a failed business. It's bankrupt. Morally bankrupt. And I'm liquidating my shares. I stood up. They remained seated, frozen on the couch. That means I'm done. I'm withdrawing my time, my energy, and my love. The accounts are closed. I turned and walked away toward the large glass windows overlooking the lake. I didn't tell them to leave. I didn't need to. The meeting was over. Their presence in my house, in my life, was over. I listened as moments later I heard the sound of the front door opening and then closing for the last time. Months later, the sunlight was warm on the back of my neck. I pressed my hands into the rich, dark soil, firming it around the base of a young maple tree. The air smelled of damp earth and new beginnings. In the distance, I could hear the sound of children's laughter drifting through the crisp autumn air. I was in the Higgins and Arthur Memorial Garden. It was a small public park, a patch of green and quiet in the middle of the city. I had bought the derelict lot it stood on and funded its creation. There were flower beds and benches, a small playground, and a community reading circle. It was named for the two people who had, in their own ways, given me my freedom: Mrs. Higgins, whose simple need for kindness had been my breaking point, and Grandpa Arthur, who had given me the key to unlock my own life. Mrs. Higgins was sitting on a bench near the playground, reading a story to a group of neighborhood children. She was warm and safe, her new furnace long since installed, her winters now comfortable. After her landlord had tried to evict her, I had bought her building, lowered the rents for all the elderly tenants, and funded a proper maintenance program. It was a small thing, really, a footnote in the Orion Fund's portfolio, but it felt more real than any billion-dollar acquisition. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. It was a news alert. Apex Financial Group announces record quarter, following major restructuring. Michael Ross had kept his job. The bank had survived. My paused withdrawal had forced them to clean house, to trim the fat, to actually pay attention to their culture. They were stronger for it. I never heard from Victoria again. I heard through the grapevine that she had moved to another state, taking a much lower-level job at a small credit union. Isabella had quietly paid back the money she had stolen. My parents sent a single, stiff letter asking for a reconciliation, which I never answered. They were ghosts from a former life. The transfer of $4.2 billion was the loudest thing I had ever done. But it wasn't my greatest act. The real act of power, the one that truly changed my life, was the quiet withdrawal of my love and my loyalty from people who had bankrupted my spirit. I had spent a lifetime making deposits into a family account that gave me nothing in return. Closing it was the single most profitable transaction I ever made. I stood up and brushed the dirt from my hands, looking at the small, hopeful maple tree. It would grow tall here. It would be seen. I looked out at the peaceful garden, at the smiling faces, and felt a sense of quiet contentment that no amount of money could ever buy. If you've ever been mocked for being small, if you've ever been made to feel invisible, remember this: silence isn't weakness, it's leverage. Like, comment, and subscribe, because the best revenge is quiet freedom.